At 0930 hours on April 30th, 1943, a Spanish fisherman working off Punta Umbria near Huelva saw something dark floating in the water. He pulled his boat closer. It was a body, face down, British military uniform, Mae West, life jacket partially inflated, a black leather briefcase chained to the wrist. The fisherman called ashore. Spanish soldiers arrived. They recovered the body and carried it to Huelva, where it was handed to a naval judge. Word spread quickly. A British officer had washed ashore. He was carrying documents, official documents with secret stamps and high-level signatures. The German Abwehr had an agent in Huelva, Adolf Klaus, vice consul officially, intelligence officer in reality. When he learned about the body and the briefcase, he acted immediately. He contacted Madrid. He demanded access to the documents. The Spanish were technically neutral, but Spain owed Germany. German forces had helped Francisco Franco win the Spanish Civil War. Spanish officials cooperated with German intelligence regularly. The documents were opened carefully. They were photographed. The photographs were sent to Berlin. The deception was working. The body was not a British officer killed in a plane crash. The body was Glyndwr Michael, a Welsh vagrant, died January 24, 1943 in a London warehouse after ingesting rat poison containing phosphorus. The documents were forgeries. Elaborate forgeries prepared by British intelligence. The entire operation was deception. Operation Mincemeat, the most successful single deception operation of World War II, the operation that convinced Adolf Hitler the Allies would invade Greece and Sardinia when the actual target was Sicily. The corpse that fooled the Führer. The story begins not with the body but with the problem. In January 1943, at the Casablanca Conference, Allied leaders decided the next major offensive would be Sicily. The island was obvious target. After defeating Axis forces in North Africa, the Allies would cross the Mediterranean. Sicily was the stepping stone to Italy. Geography made it inevitable. The Germans knew it. The Italians knew it. Everyone knew it. But knowing the target was Sicily meant the Germans and Italians would concentrate forces there. They would prepare defenses. They would position reserves. The invasion would face maximum resistance. Casualties would be high. Success would be uncertain, unless the Allies could convince the Axis that Sicily was not the target. This was Operation Barclay. The deception plan for the Sicily invasion designated Operation Husky. Multiple deception efforts would suggest the Allies planned to invade elsewhere. Fake radio traffic, dummy equipment, false intelligence leaked through double agents, physical deceptions including fake armies assembled in Egypt suggesting an attack on Greece, and one particularly audacious scheme: plant documents on a dead body, float the body off Spain, let the Germans discover the documents, make them believe Sicily was a feint and Greece was the real target. The concept came from the Trout Memo. In September 1939, Rear Admiral John Godfrey, Director of Naval Intelligence, circulated a memorandum listing deception ideas. Number 28 on the list: a corpse dressed as an airman with dispatches in his pockets could be dropped on the coast, supposedly from a parachute that failed to open. The memo was written by Godfrey's personal assistant, Lieutenant Commander Ian Fleming. Yes, that Ian Fleming, the one who would later create James Bond. Fleming's creativity extended beyond fiction. Flight: Lieutenant Charles Cholmondeley of MI5 and Lieutenant Commander Ewan Montague of Naval Intelligence developed the plan. Cholmondeley conceived the operation initially. He called it Plan Trojan Horse. Montague refined it. They submitted the plan to the 20 Committee, the British organization managing double agents and deception operations. The committee approved on January 2nd, 1943. The planners began creating the corpse's identity. They named him William Martin, Captain Acting Major, Royal Marines, attached to Combined Operations Headquarters. Date of birth: March 29th, 1907. The legend had to be detailed, plausible, checkable. If the Germans investigated, they would find confirmation that William Martin existed. His name would appear on military rosters. His identity documents would match official formats. His personal effects would tell a coherent story. Montague and Cholmondeley assembled the personal effects over weeks. A photograph of his fiancée. Her name was Pam. Actually, she was an MI5 clerk named Jean Leslie who agreed to be photographed for the operation. 2 love letters from Pam, written by another MI5 clerk. The letters mentioned their engagement. Theatre ticket stubs for April 22nd to see Strike a New Note at the Prince of Wales Theatre. The show was actually playing. A receipt for an engagement ring purchased from a London jeweler, £53. A hotel bill. An overdraft letter from Lloyd's Bank at 53 High Street, Lombard Street, dated April 2nd. The overdraft was £19, 14 shillings and 9 pence. A letter from his father. The father was addressed as John Glyndwr Martin of Cardiff, Wales. The letter mentioned family matters in vague terms appropriate for a father writing to a son. The documents had to create a person, not just a name. A person with relationships, debts, habits, plans. A person whose death would be tragic because he had a life worth living. The deception worked by being complete. Every detail supported every other detail. There were no contradictions, no gaps. William Martin existed on paper so completely that even people who knew he was fictional started thinking of him as real. Finding the body was difficult. The corpse had to meet specific criteria. Male, approximately 30 to 40 years old. Died recently enough that decomposition would not be too advanced, but not so recently that the body appeared too fresh for someone who had been in the water several days. Died from causes that could plausibly be drowning or hypothermia. No obvious injuries inconsistent with an air crash at sea. No identifying marks or tattoos that would complicate the false identity. Bentley Purchase, a coroner in London, agreed to help. He worked with St. Pancras District Coroner's Office. He had access to bodies held in morgues, pending identification or burial. In January 1943, Purchase contacted Montague. A body was available. Glyndwr Michael, 34 years old. Welsh, from Aberbargode in Monmouthshire. Homeless. Died after ingesting rat poison. The poison was phosphorus-based. It would cause yellowing of the skin and liver damage detectable in autopsy. This was a risk. If Spanish doctors performed thorough autopsy and found phosphorus poisoning, they might question whether the body had been in the sea. But Purchase believed the decomposition after several days in water would mask the poisoning. Montague accepted the risk. Purchase falsified the death certificate. He certified that Glyndwr Michael had died and been buried abroad. This was illegal. Purchase committed document fraud, but the war made such actions permissible when they served intelligence purposes. The body was transferred to MI5 custody. It was kept in a mortuary at Hackney. The temperature was maintained just above freezing to slow decomposition, without freezing the body, which would create unnatural appearance. On April 17, 1943, Montague and his team dressed the body. Royal Marines battle dress uniform, trench coat, standard issue boots, Mae West life jacket. The uniform was authentic, obtained from military stores with appropriate authorizations. The details mattered. Buttons correct. Insignia correct. Everything a Royal Marines officer would actually wear. They placed the personal effects in the pockets. Wallet with identity card and papers. Letters from Pam in the inside pocket. Theater stubs. Loose change. A packet of cigarettes. Matches. Keys. The briefcase was critical. It contained the actual deception documents. 2 letters. One from Lieutenant General Archibald Nye, Vice Chief of the Imperial General Staff, to General Harold Alexander, Commander of Allied Ground Forces in North Africa. The letter discussed plans for operations in the Mediterranean. It mentioned that Sicily would be the target of a feint to draw Axis attention, while the real assault would be launched against Greece, specifically Kalamata in the Peloponnese. The letter mentioned Allied concerns about security and asked Alexander to ensure limited distribution of operational plans. The second letter was from Admiral Lord Louis Mountbatten, Chief of Combined Operations, to Admiral Andrew Cunningham, Commander of Allied Naval Forces in the Mediterranean. This letter was cover for the first. It introduced Major Martin, who was carrying the letter from Nye to Alexander. Mountbatten asked Cunningham to arrange for Martin to return to London after delivering the letter because Martin was expert on landing craft matters and was needed for planning future operations. The letter also mentioned sardines as another possible target. This referred to Sardinia, an Italian island that could plausibly be invasion target. Both letters were authentic in appearance, written on official letterhead, signed by the actual generals and admirals whose names appeared. Montague had arranged for Nye and Mountbatten to sign the letters personally after explaining the deception operation. The signatures were real, the content was false. But German intelligence examining the documents would see genuine signatures from high-ranking officers. This would suggest authenticity. The briefcase was chained to Martin's wrist using a standard courier chain. British officers carrying classified documents used such chains routinely. The chain would suggest Martin was a courier transporting important papers. The Germans would assume the papers were legitimate because they were being transported using proper security procedures. On April 19, 1943, the body was placed in a specially designed steel canister. The canister was cylindrical, approximately 6 feet long, insulated with asbestos wadding to maintain temperature. The interior was packed with dry ice to slow decomposition during transport. Air holes allowed carbon dioxide to vent. The canister was sealed. It was loaded onto a van. Racing car driver St. John Horsfall drove the van from London to Holyloch in Scotland. The journey took approximately 12 hours. Speed was essential because decomposition progressed even with refrigeration. At Holyloch, the canister was loaded aboard HMS Seraph, a submarine commanded by Lieutenant Norman Jewell. Seraph had been selected for the mission because Jewell was experienced and discreet. He had conducted covert operations previously, including inserting agents on enemy coasts. He could be trusted with a mission this unusual. On April 19th at approximately 1800 hours, Seraph departed Holyloch. Destination: Spanish coast near Huelva. The submarine carried a crew of approximately 50 men. Only Jewell and his officers knew about the canister's contents. The crew was told it contained weather equipment for a secret operation. The voyage took 11 days. Seraph traveled submerged during daylight, surfaced at night to recharge batteries and ventilate the boat. The crew avoided contact with other vessels. The Mediterranean was contested waters. German and Italian submarines operated throughout the region. British submarines also patrolled. Collision or detection by any vessel would compromise the mission. Seraph reached the designated position on April 30th at approximately 0:30 hours, 1 nautical mile offshore from Huelva. Jewell surfaced. He ordered all crew below except the officers. 4 officers remained on deck. The canister was brought up through the forward hatch. The officers opened it. The smell was overwhelming. Decomposition had progressed despite the dry ice. The body was discolored. The skin was greenish, but the uniform was intact. The briefcase was chained to the wrist. Everything appeared correct. The officers lifted the body out of the canister. Jewell read Psalm 39. The body was lowered into the water. The submarine engines were put full astern. The propeller wash pushed the corpse toward shore. The current would carry it the rest of the way. The officers watched until the body disappeared from view. Then they resealed the canister and jettisoned it 12 miles offshore in deep water. They attempted to sink it with machine gun fire. The insulation caused it to float. They used plastic explosive charges. The canister sank. Seraph proceeded to Gibraltar. Jewell sent a coded message: "Mincemeat completed." At Huelva. The body washed ashore approximately 5 hours later. The fishermen who found it notified authorities immediately. The Spanish Navy took custody. An autopsy was performed on May 1st by Spanish doctor Eduardo del Torno. The body had been in the water between 3 and 5 days based on decomposition. Cause of death appeared to be drowning or hypothermia. Del Torno noted fluid in the lungs consistent with drowning. He noted no injuries inconsistent with an air crash at sea. The Mae West suggested the deceased had attempted to save himself but had died from exposure. Everything appeared consistent with the cover story. Del Torno certified death by drowning. He recommended burial. The British consul in Huelva was Francis Haselden. He arrived at the morgue shortly after the body was discovered. He identified the deceased as Major William Martin, based on the identity documents. He expressed concern about the briefcase. He sent urgent telegrams to London requesting instructions. The telegrams were intentionally sent using codes the British knew German intelligence had broken. The messages emphasized the extreme sensitivity of documents Major Martin had been carrying. London replied with equally urgent messages demanding immediate return of the briefcase and contents. The exchange continued for days. The frantic British messages were designed to convince German intelligence that the documents were genuinely important. Adolf Klaus, the German agent in Huelva, monitored these exchanges. He concluded the documents must contain valuable intelligence. He pressured Spanish officials to allow German examination of the briefcase contents before returning them to the British. On May 3rd, Spanish Navy Captain Manuel de Pablo Martin agreed. The briefcase was opened carefully. German agents photographed the contents using equipment that allowed the letters to be removed. Photographed and replaced without breaking the wax seals. The operation took hours. The photographs were transmitted to Berlin via secure channels. On May 11th, The briefcase was returned to Haselden. It appeared unopened. The seals were intact, but close examination revealed the letters had been removed and replaced. Tiny marks on the paper indicated where steel rods had been inserted to roll the letters out of the envelopes. The Germans had seen everything. In London, Montagu received the returned briefcase on May 14th. He examined the seals and papers under magnification. The tampering was evident. The Germans had accessed the documents. Now the question was whether they believed them. The answer came through Ultra, the British signals intelligence operation that had broken German Enigma codes. Intercepted, German communications revealed that Abwehr forwarded the photographs to Berlin with assessment that the documents appeared genuine. The assessment was sent to Armed Forces High Command. Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, head of the Abwehr, personally briefed Adolf Hitler. Hitler accepted the intelligence. He ordered reinforcements sent to Greece and Sardinia. He personally directed Field Marshal Erwin Rommel to take command of forces in Greece. Additional divisions were transferred from France and the Eastern Front to defend Greece and the Balkans. Defenses in Sicily were reduced accordingly. The deception was complete. The Allies had convinced Hitler that Greece was the main target and Sicily was the feint. The actual situation was reversed. Sicily was the main target. The feints were operations suggesting Greece and Sardinia. But Hitler believed the lie. German forces were positioned to defend the wrong places. Sicily would be weakly defended when the invasion began. On July 10, 1943, Operation Husky commenced. 160,000 Allied troops assaulted Sicily. The defending forces numbered approximately 230,000 Italian and 40,000 German troops. But many Italian units surrendered immediately. The Germans fought but were outnumbered and outgunned. Sicily fell on August 17th after 38 days of fighting. Allied casualties were approximately 25,000 killed, wounded, or missing. Axis casualties exceeded 165,000, including 135,000 Italian prisoners. The rapid Allied victory was attributed partly to Operation Mincemeat. The deception had worked. German reinforcements that should have defended Sicily were in Greece waiting for an invasion that never came. Even after Sicily fell, Hitler remained convinced Greece was the main target. Intercepted communications showed German intelligence assessing the Sicily invasion as a preliminary operation before the main assault on Greece. Hitler kept divisions in Greece through autumn 1943. These divisions were not available to defend Italy when the Allies invaded the mainland in September. The strategic impact of Operation Mincemeat extended months beyond the Sicily invasion. The question of whose body was used remains disputed. The official British position states Glyndwr Michael. His name was added to the gravestone in Huelva in 1998. But alternative theories persist. Some historians argue the body was a sailor from HMS Dasher. The aircraft carrier exploded in the Clyde on March 27, 1943. 349 crewmen died. The explosion was near Holy Loch, where Seraph departed. Some bodies were never recovered. Historians John and Noreen Steele argued in 2004 that the body was Sub-Lieutenant John Melville, a Dasher casualty. They noted that a fresh corpse from a marine accident would be more plausible than a 3-month-old corpse preserved on ice. They also noted that Montagu's memoir described driving from London with the body, but a Scottish source would not require that journey. Others suggest different Dasher casualties. The debate continues. Declassified documents from 1996 identified Glyndwr Michael, but some documents remain classified. The true identity may never be proven definitively. What is certain is that someone died in London or Scotland in early 1943. That person's body was used in Operation Mincemeat. The body washed ashore in Spain. The documents were found. The Germans believed them. The deception succeeded, whether the body was Glyndwr Michael or John Melville or someone else. That person contributed to Allied victory after death in ways impossible during life. The grave in Huelva remains. Plot number 1886 in the Roman Catholic section of Nuestra Señora de la Soledad Cemetery. The original headstone read, William Martin, born 29th March 1907, died 24th April 1943, beloved son of John Glyndwr. Martin and the late Antonia Martin of Cardiff, Wales, Dulcet decorum est pro patria mori, R.E.P. The inscription is Latin. It translates as, "It is sweet and fitting to die for one's country." a line from Horace. Later inscriptions added, Glyndwr Michael served as Major William Martin R.M. The grave is maintained by the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. It receives visitors regularly. People interested in intelligence history, people fascinated by the deception, people honoring the man who never was. The architects of Operation Mincemeat were rewarded after the war. Ewan Montagu was appointed Officer of the Order of the British Empire in 1944. Charles Cholmondeley was appointed Member of the Order of the British Empire in 1948. Both continued intelligence work through the remainder of the war and afterward. Montagu became a judge advocate and later a judge. He wrote his memoir, The Man Who Never Was, in 1953. The book became a bestseller. It was adapted into a film in 1956, starring Clifton Webb as Montagu. The film took liberties with facts but conveyed the essential story. A corpse, false documents, Spanish coast, German intelligence, successful deception. The security services censored parts of Montagu's book. He could not mention Ultra. He could not reveal that British intelligence had broken Enigma codes. The role of signals intelligence in confirming the deception remained classified until the 1970s. Montagu could not mention Glyndwr Michael's name. The body's identity remained classified until 1996. Montagu could not fully explain how the documents were prepared or who signed them. Many operational details remained secret for decades. Ian Fleming's role was downplayed initially. The Trout Memo was classified. Fleming's contribution to the concept was not publicly acknowledged until years later. By then, Fleming was famous as the author of the James Bond novels. The connection between Bond's creator and Operation Mincemeat added to the operation's mystique. The gadgets in Bond novels, particularly items created by Q, were inspired partly by Charles Fraser Smith, the intelligence technician who designed the canister for transporting the body. Fleming based Q on Fraser Smith. The creative mind that invented Bond also contributed to one of the war's most successful deceptions. The operational lessons from Mincemeat influenced later deceptions. The success demonstrated that elaborate deceptions could work if details were complete. The Germans were thorough. They investigated. They checked facts. They looked for inconsistencies. But when the deception was complete, when every detail supported the narrative, the Germans believed it. This became doctrine. Later operations used similar techniques: create complete cover stories, support them with authentic-looking documents, plant them where enemy intelligence would find them. Trust enemy thoroughness to validate the deception. The ethical questions are uncomfortable. Glyndwr Michael's body was used without consent. He was dead. He could not consent. His family was not informed. The operation was classified. No one asked permission to use a deceased vagrant's body for military deception. The coroner falsified the death certificate. These were violations of law and ethics. They were justified by military necessity. The deception would save Allied lives. The invasion of Sicily would succeed with fewer casualties because German forces were misdeployed. The utilitarian calculus was clear. Using one corpse without consent was preferable to thousands of Allied soldiers dying in an invasion against prepared defenses. But utilitarianism does not resolve ethical questions. Glyndwr Michael was a person. He had no one. He was homeless. He died alone. He was unknown. These facts made him useful for the deception, but they do not make using his body ethical. His poverty and isolation were circumstances that allowed his exploitation. This raises questions about how societies treat vulnerable people. In life, Glyndwr Michael was invisible. In death, he was useful. He was given a name that was not his. He was buried with honors he never earned. His true identity was concealed for 50 years. The person was erased. The useful corpse remained. The modern recognition is inadequate compensation. Adding his name to the gravestone in 1998, placing a memorial plaque at Hackney Mortuary in 2021, mentioning him in histories and documentaries, these gestures acknowledge his contribution, but they do not address the exploitation. Glyndwr Michael never chose to participate in military operations. That choice was made for him after death by people who valued his corpse more than they had valued his life. The strategic impact justifies the operation from military perspective. Operation Mincemeat contributed to Allied victory in Sicily. It saved lives by misdirecting German forces. It demonstrated that deception operations could influence strategic decisions by enemy leadership. Hitler personally ordered reinforcements to Greece based on the false documents. This was strategic deception at highest level. One corpse, two fake letters, and the German war effort was disrupted for months. The tactical execution was nearly perfect. Every detail worked. The body was plausible. The documents were convincing. The method of delivery was credible. The location was optimal. The Spanish cooperated as expected. The Germans investigated as anticipated. They believed the documents as hoped. The confirmation through ultra-proof success. The operation achieved everything the planners intended. This was professional intelligence work executed with precision and creativity. The human element makes the operation memorable. William Martin was not real, but he felt real. The photograph of Pam, the letters discussing their engagement, the father's letter mentioning family matters, the overdraft at the bank, the theater tickets. These details created a person. German intelligence officers examining the documents saw not just military plans, but evidence of a life. An officer with a fiancée, with debts, with a father who wrote to him. A person who went to the theater, who carried cigarettes and loose change, who wore a standard-issue uniform and boots. The completeness of the deception made William Martin believable because he was human, not a perfect officer. A regular person with a regular life doing his duty and dying for it. That humanity was entirely fictional. It was created by intelligence officers working in London offices. They invented William Martin. They gave him Pam. They wrote the father's letter. They purchased the theater tickets. They created the bank overdraft. Every detail was fabrication. But the fabrication was so complete that even people who knew it was fake responded emotionally. Montague wrote that his team felt sad disposing of William Martin's personal effects after the operation ended. They had created a person. Ending that person's existence felt like loss, even though the person never existed. This is the power of narrative. Stories create reality, not physical reality, psychological reality. William Martin existed in the minds of everyone who encountered his story. The Spanish officials who handled the body, the German intelligence officers who examined the documents, Adolf Hitler who ordered divisions to Greece, Allied soldiers who survived Sicily because German reinforcements were elsewhere. All of them experienced William Martin as real. The fiction had real consequences. The story changed history. Operation Mincemeat succeeded because it understood human psychology. People believe narratives that are complete. They believe details that support each other. They believe when authentication appears genuine. German intelligence could have concluded the documents were false. They could have assumed the body was planted. They had reason to be suspicious. British intelligence had deceived them before. But the details convinced them. The authentic signatures, the personal effects, the courier chain, the frantic British messages trying to recover the briefcase. Everything suggested the documents were genuine. So the Germans believed, and believing the lie, they made strategic mistakes that helped the Allies win the war. The corpse that fooled Hitler was not just a body. It was a complete deception, executed with precision and creativity. It was intelligence work at its finest. And it was exploitation of a dead vagrant whose identity was erased to serve military purposes. Both statements are true. The operation was brilliant and unethical, successful and troubling, celebrated and criticized. This is the nature of intelligence operations in wartime. Effectiveness matters more than ethics. Results matter more than methods. Victory justifies means. Until the war ends and people examine what was done and ask whether it should have been done, Operation Mincemeat changed the war. It saved lives. It demonstrated deception could work at strategic level. And it used a person's body without permission to accomplish those goals. That is the story, brilliant and troubling, successful and ethically compromised. The man who never was achieved more in death than most achieve in life. But he never chose to participate. That choice was made for him by others who valued his usefulness more than his humanity.